The iPad Pro is a really nice tablet. It's a pleasure to use with its 120Hz screen and super fast performance. But it's also really expensive at over 800 euros, and that's for a device that is basically just a nice to have and not something you really need to own. But what if you could get that same experience for basically half the price? And that's where the iPad Pro 2018 comes in. You can now pick up this tablet for about 400 to 500 euros refurbished, and that's not only half the price of what a new iPad Pro would cost, it's also less than a new iPad Air. But the question is if it's actually still worth it to pick this up. So let's start with the design. Of course, this iPad Pro still basically looks like all of the new iPad Pros. The only difference is the different camera module on the back. Apart from that, it still looks like one of the newer iPads. Especially compared to the iPad Air, there's really no difference except for the flash below the camera, which is actually an improvement over the Air. The display on here is also still amazing. That's because the 2018 iPad Pro still basically has the same screen as the 2021 iPad Pro 11-inch. And that's because only the 12.9-inch got the new mini LED screen with the local backlighting zones. And that means that there's basically no difference between this screen and the one of the newest iPad Pro. You still have that super smooth 120Hz refresh rate that is just a pleasure to use. And it's a real difference to the regular iPad Air that only has a 60Hz screen. And if you can get this for less money than an iPad Air, I would always go for this, because it's just a pleasure to use not only while scrolling, but also for using it with a pen. The 120Hz refresh rate makes drawing with a pen feel much more direct and responsive than it would on a 60Hz screen. It really feels almost like writing on paper. And what also makes the experience of drawing and writing on your iPad feel much more like paper is Paperlike. If you've watched a lot of iPad videos, then you probably have already heard of them. It's a screen protector that has a matte coating, and it makes the experience of using the pen on the screen feel much more like the experience of writing on an actual sheet of paper. A lot of people say that they still write on paper and not on an iPad with a pencil because they like the experience of writing on actual paper more. But this gets so close that I would say there's basically no reason to not try this and switch over to a full paperless workflow. If you want to try out Paperlike for yourself, which I can really just recommend, it's super easy to apply and really a nice experience to use, then you can check out the link in the video description. Let's also talk about performance real quick, because of course the iPad Pro from 2018 doesn't have the newest chip. But actually the A12X that is in the iPad Pro from 2018 is still a bit faster than the A15 that is found in the newest iPhones and also the newest iPad mini. And the newest iPad Air only has an A14 chip. So that means that this iPad is actually still faster than the newest iPad Air, despite it being 2 years older. It also has the same amount of RAM as the Air at 4 GB, and while of course it doesn't have the newest M1 chip like in the newest 2021 iPad Pros, I would say that that's something that you won't really notice day to day. That's because if you're using this tablet for video watching, consuming media, and also drawing and taking notes in class, then you don't really need the performance that the M1 gives you. That chip is really nice to have if you're really planning to use this tablet for serious work like video editing and photo editing, but I would say that most people who buy this, especially if they buy it used, they probably don't need those things. That's also because, as I said before, while the performance of the new iPad Pros is really nice, this is still basically a secondary device. That's because you cannot install all of the programs that you can install on Windows or on a Mac, so you basically still need that computer for some things. For all of the things that you would actually want to use this for, I think the performance of the A12X in here is plenty. And apart from that faster chip that I would say is basically overkill and something you don't really need to have, especially if it costs twice as much, you still get most of the benefits of the new iPad Pros. You get quad speakers on all 4 sides that have a really nice sound, and that's actually also better than the stereo speakers you get on the iPad Air. You also still have that USB-C port on the bottom that makes charging much faster. That's actually something you will really notice, especially if you come from an iPad with a Lightning port. It charges way faster over USB-C, and of course connecting accessories is also much easier with a regular USB port. So you can just connect hard drives or anything like that to your iPad really easily. And because the dimensions of all of the iPads are the same, you can also use all of the accessories that you can use with the new 2021 iPad Pro with this. So it's no problem to connect this to a Magic Keyboard or something like that. Though I would say picking up a Magic Keyboard for a 2018 iPad Pro is probably not the best idea, because that keyboard is going to cost almost as much as this tablet. What the iPad Pro also has over the iPad Air is Face ID, and it still works really well in all orientations. You can just swipe up and you're in. Though I would say that now that we have to wear masks in class, this is definitely not as convenient as it could be, and for that a fingerprint sensor like on the iPad Air would be really useful. With that, we come to the second difference to the newest iPad Pros, and that is the camera module. Of course, on the newest iPads you have a dual camera that also has an ultra-wide sensor and LiDAR. But I would say that that doesn't really matter, because you probably won't use this camera for more than document scanning, and for that, this camera is plenty capable. You don't really need the ultra-wide camera for that. And unless you're using your iPad for scanning things in 3D, then you won't really need that LiDAR scanner either. So I think that this camera is plenty for what you need in a tablet. Overall, I would say the iPad Pro 2018 is definitely still worth a look. You can pick this up for half the price of what a new iPad Pro costs, and the only differences are the M1 chip in the new iPad Pros and the camera on the back. And I think that those don't really justify paying twice as much, especially because those are things that you don't really need. The camera is something that you won't really need on a tablet, and the new M1 chip is also basically overkill for most of the things that you do with a tablet. You can now pick this up for less than the new iPad Air, and it's more capable with the 120Hz screen, quad speakers, and the Face ID module. So I would say that this is definitely still worth a look if you can find it refurbished in a good condition. If you can pick this up for about 400 euros, which is what I paid for this one, about 425, then this is basically comparable in price to a regular iPad, and the difference between that is huge, because that one still has the old design with the home button, feels much slower, doesn't have a laminated screen and all of that. So for that, I would definitely go with the iPad Pro, because this is a huge upgrade, even though it would be a refurbished one versus a new one. And that's also especially relevant for Christmas now, because the iPad Air is so popular that it's basically sold out everywhere. So this is a good way to save money, still get a tablet before Christmas, and get something better than you would have if you would have picked up the iPad Air. If you enjoyed this video, you know which buttons to press, and don't forget to press that follow button on Twitter. I'm Brian, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.